Awesome. Thank you so much. Alrighty, welcome to the May 6th Architectural Review Board. I'd like to call to order. Can we get a roll call?
Yes. Chair Thompson,
Here.
Vice Chair Lee,
Present.
Board Member Bolte,
Present.
Board Member Hirsch,
Present.
Board Member Liu.
Present.
Okay, we have a quorum.
Thank you. And pursuant to the California Governor's Executive Order 9/29/20, this meeting will be held by virtual teleconference only with no physical location. Spoken comments via a computer will be accepted through the Zoom teleconference meeting. To address the board, go to zoom.us/join. Meeting ID is 958-7390-8317. When you wish to speak on an agenda item, click on Raise Hand. When called, please limit your remarks to the time allotted. Spoken public comments using a smartphone will also be accepted through the Zoom mobile application. To offer comments using a regular phone, call 1-669-900-6833 and enter meeting ID 958-7390-8317. When you wish to speak on an agenda item, click on *9 on your phone so that we know you wish to speak. Alrighty. Well, thank you. We have oral communications next. The public may speak on any item not on the agenda. Do we have any members of the public that wish to speak?
Chair Thompson, we do have one raised hand.
Okay.
All right, one moment. Let us get up the speaker timer. Okay. Thank you, Veronica. So our speaker is Juliana. Juliana, if you're there, you can unmute yourself and speak.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I just want to make sure if there's underground parking that I have no knowledge of what's going to impact my building. So I just want to make sure nothing's going to go bad. That's it.
Ms. Lee, are you referring to the action item on the agenda?
The underground parking, yes.
Okay, we'll have a chance to do public comment for that later on. This is for any item that's not on the agenda. We'll keep a note of that.
Okay, seeing as how there's no other raised hands, that concludes oral communications.
All right, thank you. Our next item is agenda changes, additions, and deletions.
Sorry,
Beth?
that's me. No changes.
All right, thank you. The next item is city official reports.
Yes, thank you. So I think Veronica will bring up the slides. Great. The next slide here shows us continuing in virtual meetings for this foreseeable future. The city is, talking about going back to in-person work, but it's going to be a slow, gradual type thing, probably around August timeframe. But I don't know when exactly the hearings will come back to in person. So we're going to stay virtual for the time being. We do have a subcommittee. Sorry, if we go back just a second, we do have a subcommittee at the end of today, and that would be Board Member Balte and Board Member Liu. On the next page, we have the agendas, future agendas. May 20th, there are no items, and so that hearing is canceled. So we all get a day off, yay. And then June 3rd, we do have the 486 Hamilton project. We're expecting to bring that back, assuming that the applicant is able to work with us on some vibration issues. So thank you.
All right, thank you.
And I think actually Board Chair Thompson, you also wanted me to talk during this time about an email that the board members had received about the pole colors at the Caltrain station.
Sure, yeah, if you could speak briefly to some email correspondence that we received regarding that.
Yes, so the board did receive email from a resident concerned about the color of the poles, the electrification poles that are happening along the Caltrain line, in this particular case at the Caltrain station. It is a Caltrain, state project, so we only can recommend, we cannot require. But what we as a city recommended was to have the poles at that particular station be a tan color to be in keeping with that historic train station. And so, and the other poles were to be green and black. And Caltrain did follow through on our recommendations. They also spoke with the neighbor in February and said that unfortunately, because the pole has already been painted and you will know better than I that it's powder coated, and so it's not an easy change to change that color. So they were not able to make the requested change of the resident. Thank you.
Thank you for the update.
Could I ask a question about that?
Certainly.
Is that pole, when we look at that photo and think, how did that happen? Is that pole actually next to the station, in a portion of the station?
From my look at the photos, but we were looking, at sort of bird's eye view kind of photos, it seemed to be near the station. I have not checked up on it exactly, just because we really don't have purview at the end of the day. So there's not much that we can affect, unfortunately.
Well, one would think that maybe other areas within the system are being painted, perhaps the green that would work, and that an inquiry into whether it is really a part of the station or a part of the landscape coming up to the station, that it would be a consideration which we could bring up to the to Caltrain and see if there was some future possibility of if they are in fact painting other poles within the distance that could allow them to come to redo this one. It certainly from the photo looked really quite out of place, and I kind of agree with the person who's making the comment, and was feeling a bit embarrassed that somehow we, even if it's only a suggestion, wouldn't have stated that the poles would be appropriately colored within the station, but that anything in the perimeter landscape would be of a landscape color.
Yeah, so I think the poles come pre-painted and get installed. Could this pole be changed out for another and the tan pole go somewhere else? I don't know how far into construction, Caltrans is, and that would be a decision for them. But I can certainly ask the question.
And if the board would like to agendize this for a future agenda, I think please let me know. Send me an email and we can try and put that on an agenda if we'd like to discuss this more.
Bosco, I think you should agendize this. Yes, I'll say it right now.
Yes, I second that.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Thanks. All right. Thank you for that. Okay, we'll move on to our action items. So our first action item is 4256 El Camino Real parking garage revisions. This is a public hearing, quasi-judicial request for changes to an approved project to revise the underground garage parking and clarify the director's parking adjustment. I'll hand it over to Jody.
Yes, we should have Sam here, Sam Gutierrez, our project planner. And so he will bring up his presentation.
Hey, can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'm playing with multiple screens right now. So one moment while I get that set up. Okay.
Yeah, it's always fun when the presentation takes over your whole computer.
Right, exactly. You're trying to maneuver around here. Okay. Can everyone see the presentation screen?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. Okay. Thanks for being patient with me there. Okay. So I am Samuel Gutierrez, project planner for this item today before the Architectural Review Board. I should note that I've been the project planner for this specific hotel project for, I think, going on 3 years now. It's gone through quite a lengthy process, which I'll cover in the presentation. So moving to that process that I just mentioned, I wanted to provide some background and context for the Architectural Review Board and anyone listening from the general public. This project originally started with a 96-room hotel that was recommended for approval by the ARB on January 16th, 2020, and approved by the director on June 3rd, 2020. It did have an EIR done, and the approval was finalized once the mitigation monitoring program and then the EIR was finalized and certified. So the project and project EIR included a director's adjustment for loading space, which reduced the required loading area, which is quite large, actually for a semi, 12 by 45 in their municipal code, down to an SU 30, which is likened to a standard FedEx or UPS delivery vehicle, and a 15% parking reduction that included aisle parking. The project was approved with 85 parking spaces plus 17 aisle parking spaces for a total of 102, 6 over the 96 required if it were to be fully parked per code. Again, 96 rooms, requires 1 per room, and that's how the breakdown originally was. It did include a 24/7 valet parking, which is always required when we have lift parking systems and aisle parking. We need some type of trained professionals to manage that system, being that this isn't a residential property, so this would be new users quite often, so that's where the valet requirement is. And then the project did have some changes associated with that original approval that needed to go to subcommittee regarding the rear massing. And that went to subcommittee and was moved for approval 5/21/2020, noting that last year we were still calling it subcommittee, now we call it ad hoc committee, I believe. Moving on, the project was, this current project, which is the parking garage revision, was submitted in January, and the request by the applicant was to submit these garage revisions that I'm going to discuss and a clarification of the director's parking adjustment. These changes to the garage change it from a 2-level to a single level, seek to provide 77 parking spaces physically on site, down from the 102 that was provided previously. I will go in depth into those numbers later in the presentation. And other changes associated with this would be the garage lobby area and hotel back of house spaces within the garage. That was originally in 2 levels, and now that's kind of been rearranged to fit within the single level. Continuing here to discuss the director's parking adjustment, the parking adjustments are not typically subject to ARB purview, but given the high level of public interest and public review for the hotel project, again, I believe the project originally took 2 years of review, 2 prelims and 3 formal ARB hearings, and then a subcommittee. So quite a lengthy review process and involvement with the public. The director determined that, with those things in mind, that these revisions should actually be considered by the ARB to allow public discussion and to allow the ARB to provide some comments and feedback to the director. However, because this is a garage revision, the hotel itself wouldn't really be changing its massing or exterior. The ARB's purview is limited to ARB finding number 1 and finding number 4. These findings require that the design is functional, has access for all modes of transportation, and provides support of the necessary operation of the building. So the analysis of the proposed changes were reviewed by city staff. This included the new parking and circulation memo that was prepared and is in one of the attachments for the staff report. And this memo analyzed several factors for the proposed changes, which is on-site circulation within the garage and for trucks, i.e. the loading area in the parc cocher in the ground level, the parking stall dimensions, traffic operations, again, within the parc cocher, which is the driveway area off of El Camino. Not that there's any changes proposed there, but we did want to analyze and check and see if a single level garage would impact any operations at the ground level. Of course, the valet operation would be key, so that was analyzed. And then the projected trip generation, which ties everything together. If the projected demand and timing were to be off, for example, then that would make potential queuing issues, for the site. But when the analysis concluded, we found that the proposed changes would not cause any queuing off-site, meaning that the site design and these changes, along with the valet operation, are sufficient to have all queuing done on site, and the circulation for the project would function correctly. Everything would be sufficient towards the projected demand for the parking on site. Continuing, the analysis was conducted by the same consultant for consistency purposes that was previously on the project. And per city policy, that consultant was managed by city staff. Again, the analysis concluded it would not cause queuing off-site, so there would be no issues with El Camino Real, consistent with the original approval. The circulation for the site in terms of modes of transportation function correctly. And the valet operation, again, is sufficient for the projected demands of the site. Associated with these changes, there was a need for the TDM plan that was previously approved to be revised to correspond with these changes that the applicant's seeking. The TDM plan was reviewed by city staff, and after review and working with the applicant, now the TDM plan that is found for this project or these project revisions is on par with what was previously approved for the project in terms of requirements and thresholds. So here, just to go into the previously approved design, you can see here on the left is the first level for the previously approved design, which had a 2-level garage. So here you can see that the driveway ramp starts from the upper level. That's where it's cut off. I think you should be able to see my mouse cursor here, correct? Can everyone see that? Yes? Okay.
Yeah.
So here, the cars enter, they circle around, and this was the original valet drop-off area. And then this would be the lower area for the parking garage. This would be the level 2 of the garage. And here's the proposed design changes. This would be a single level garage requiring less excavation, and obviously has a more compact design. You see here there's more lift parking being used. These are the mechanical lifts, 3-level lifts, and there's some aisle parking as well. You do see some standard spaces which do meet the requirement for the lift parking of 10% standard, which exclude the accessible spaces and, of course, the aisle parking spaces, which are not standard spaces per our code. And here you can see the lobby redesign that accompanied this revision, along with some of the back of house elements. And here on the right, you can see a part of the analysis from the updated memo for the project. that was done by the project consultant managed by the city. We wanted to be sure that the vehicle turning radiuses and swept patterns would be sufficient to allow vehicles to efficiently enter into this design. We did have turning radius diagrams and measurements for the previously approved project, so it was only right to do this, of course, for these revisions. And this is a table from the, or I should say the simplified table found within the staff report for this project. Here you can see that we have 96 code required spaces before we get into any adjustments. 96 parking spaces for 96 hotel rooms. The approved project had 54 standard spaces, had 26 mechanical lift, 17 valet operated aisle spaces, 4 accessible spaces. The parking reduction requested was 15. The code compliant spaces was 102, and physical provided was 102. As I get into that, I want to note that since the project was approved, there were code changes where we now count accessible spaces twice towards the minimum parking requirement. So that's where you see this code compliant spaces versus physical parking spaces. That accounts for when we double count. Of course, the previous project was approved before those code changes, so we did not consider that at the time. The current project is subject to those changes, so that's where this, again, this breakdown of compliant spaces versus physical. And just to run through, the project is proposing 8 standard spaces. So these are standard stall spaces on concrete or asphalt. The mechanical lifts go up to 59. The valet operated spaces go to 5. The accessible spaces, including 2 EV accessible spaces, total 5. And of course, those double count, so they are equivalent to 10 spaces. The parking reduction sought is the same, and the total compliant code compliant spaces is 82, with 77 physically provided, again accounting for the double count of those 5 spaces. I do show a little formula here for the breakdown of how we do the parking reduction. You take the 96, you multiply that by 15%, you get 14 spaces. That reduces the parking down to 82 that would be required. And again, once you account for the 5 double counted accessible spaces, you get 77 physically provided. I hope that wasn't too confusing. I'm happy to answer questions later. And then this is just an example of the more complex table shown in the attachment for the zoning comparison. I did want to show that, and it is in one of the attachments for the staff report, but essentially it says the same information, just at a higher level detail. Getting into the ARB findings, again, the ARB's purview for this is found within finding number 1, which is to make sure that the project is consistent with applicable provisions of the comprehensive plan, zoning code, and any other applicable plans. But of course, this is not in a coordinated area plan, so this is limited really to the zoning code and the comprehensive plan. And looking at some comp plan policies, we see here we have program in transportation and goals in transportation. And I list in brief summary, which is also found in one of the attachments for the staff report, but here in brief, the consistency with the with each programming goal. That continues on to additional policies from our comprehensive plan related to transportation. And then finally, finding number 4, which requires that the design is functional, allowing for ease of pedestrian safety, bicycle traffic, and supporting the building's necessary operation. So here, just to touch on that one, after reviewing it, we find that the project maintains proper circulation per the analysis of the design through the circulation and parking memo, and has access for all modes of travel. Of course, the 24-hour valet service is maintained, and access for pedestrian and bicycles are provided throughout the site. The pedestrians and bicyclists who visit the site can access all levels via the elevators on site, which go from the ground level up to the upper floors and at the garage level as well. And the design changes do not change the function and circulation of the driveways, that being the underground driveway or the at-grade porte cochere driveway in front of El Camino. One thing to note is that we did receive some public comments, or actually really public questions that was forwarded to the board. And I just wanted to list them here for public view and to remind the board. These questions really centered on how these changes may impact traffic, circulation, queuing on El Camino, and really the function of the parking operation of the hotel. And as I went through my presentation, many of these questions were answered. There is maintaining of the 24-hour valet service. There is sufficient queuing area for vehicles visiting the site within the garage and within the porte cochere. The loading area is maintained per the previous approval. Hotel staff may park at the site. The municipal code doesn't differentiate between parking for staff and guests. But of course, the TDM program that's associated with this also requires some transit use, carpooling. There's also the on-site shuttle that is maintained, which will take people to Caltrain stations. And there was a question about the tour buses, which we did address in the previous application for the hotel. There was a concern about tour buses visiting the site and blocking driveways. The conditions of approval still maintain that the curb management occurs just like before. Red no parking area in front of the hotel. Management of that porte cochere with the loading and unloading areas there, and then of course the valet service. But noting that the tour bus phenomenon is a citywide issue through El Camino being a state highway. It has articulated buses from VTA. It has large vehicles, oversized vehicles coming to and from construction sites. It is a highway, so it does have the capacity for tour buses. Of course, any vehicle, be it a tour bus or standard vehicle that's double parked or found parked in a red area, if observed by Palo Alto Police Department, would be cited for that infraction. Any vehicles observed, blocking driveways or double parking should be reported to the Palo Alto Police Department, and they would follow up because all of those vehicles do have registration and coach operators that they can contact. If the ARB wishes, I could go more in depth in all of these questions, but I just wanted to give a brief overview on that, public comments and questions that we received. And the recommendation from staff to the ARB, again, to remind you, is to review the project and provide a recommendation to the Director of Planning and Development Services based on the project's ability to meet ARB finding number 1 and number 4, and also to provide feedback on the director's parking adjustment. The director would consider the ARB's thoughts on that. And that concludes the staff's presentation.
Thank you. Can we hear from the applicant?
Good morning.
Good
So
morning.
shall I share my screen now, Sam?
Yes,
Ye-
sorry, I lost it in all the little screens. 1 second while there we go.
So you'll have 10 minutes, and please state and spell your name for the record.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Randy Pop. Randy is R-A-N-D-Y. Last name is P-O-P-P. I am the entitlement support for this project. With me today is Thomas Steinmetz, who is our attorney. Let me take you through this presentation quickly. I'll just briefly that the staff report for this was excellent, and really appreciate the very thorough presentation. So I'll just try and be brief. I think repeating a bunch of things that have already been said. So, the big question is, why are we back here today? And we have a newly configured project team who challenged the two-level parking design and asked if all the requirements could be accomplished in a single level. We anticipated clearly that there would obviously be less cost if we just do a single level garage, but there would be a pretty significant reduction in the duration of the time it takes to construct, minimizing impact to neighbors, and we would better use our resources: less concrete, less steel, less fuel for construction, reduced excavation, removal. And interesting to note, in the changes that we've made, there is a slight reduction in the impact to the adjacent trees. So all of that seemed like a great benefit, and we realized after doing a bit of work, we could comfortably fit all this into a single level. So we shared this with staff, and the discussion with them raised some questions about what a 15% parking reduction means when you have a valet program. And it's interesting when you read through the zoning code, it's a bit antiquated and not as precise as you might hope it would be. It does indicate that the valet parking is defined as being a service that uses any city street or alley or city parking facility. There's actually a bit of a lack of clarity in this code about how private garages and valet commingle. And initially, staff had indicated their typical interpretation was that valet spaces don't count as standard stalls, creating a bit of a tension in the language. I think in Sam's presentation, he clarified that a bit. The interpretations changed and shifted over time here. And similar to the Marriott hotels down at 744 San Antonio Road, the valet spaces in that garage are counting toward the minimum requirement. So we're jumping in here and trying to move through this calculation clearly, and adding those valet spaces in was important to how we were accomplishing a single level garage. So initially we understood that the 15% reduction was granted, but the valet was not counted towards that minimum requirement. And by adding the valet back in, then we were creating essentially 100% project. Remembering that this is a hotel and they don't have a parking demand that's consistent with our zoning regulations. It's something that we can all recognize, even though the zoning doesn't allow it.
Enter your meeting ID followed by pound.
Someone's unmuted.
Sorry, there's I think it's a Jeff Galbraith we can hear. Can you please mute yourself? I'll pause your time really quick.
No, it's
Okay, I see that Jeff is now muted. All right, go
Thank
ahead.
you. So just jumping in here to what I was talking about, the parking demand study that was done by Hexagon Consultants back in 2017 that studied a series of local area hotels. 13 of them showed that the average rate was actually 0.66, and we're being asked to be at a 0.5, so in excess of 0.9. This study, by the way, is in the approved project PTDM and in the updated one. So here's what we're asking. We just want you to validate our interpretation and the interpretation of the director. We'd like to have your recommendation in support of this. And we are doing this in the public forum as requested by the director and staff, just to make sure that everything is transparent. We believe a 15% reduction should be just that. The director's parking reduction should define the maximum of those cars needing to be accommodated. And that a hotel with a 24/7 valet program should be able to include all available modes of parking. That would include standard stalls, standard mechanical lift spaces, and aisle spaces provided through the valet program. We believe this interpretation is now supported by staff. It's supplemented by the city additional memo for parking and circulation analysis and the updated PDBM program. I want to just briefly mention that the neighbors did have quite a bit of interaction with us during the review process, but their communication was primarily focused on traffic and safety, not really parking capacity. And as Sam has said, the hexagon report, this additional memo really addressed all of that. I also was asked a question about how the new design might affect the front elevation of the building, and so I quickly prepared this slide for you that shows these are the basement, ground level, and second level plans of the new design. And you'll see that this ground level stair begins over here. It represents here in the, I'm sorry, this basement level stair, excuse me, that starts here, represents here on the ground level. And then adjacent to the glass, we have a sculptural stair on the interior of the building that extends up to the lobby that is at the second level. And you'll see that the initial approved ARB subcommittee elevation is consistent with the glass design and elevation of the proposed, proposed elevation. The structural brace has altered slightly as a result of doing the structural analysis that we've performed, but the openness of that lobby and the front elevation has been retained. So thank you for your time today. Happy to take any questions if you have them, and I will stop my share and let you get to your discussion. Thank you.
All right, thank you. I think we'll do questions by the board after we hear from the public. So the next item would be to hear from any members of the public that would like to speak on this item. Then I see one raised hand, two raised hands.
Yes, one moment. Let's get the speaker timer up. Okay, thank you, Veronica. So we have two raised hands. Our first speaker will be Stephanie, followed by Charlene. Stephanie, you're up first.
Sorry, I just unmuted. Thank you. I'm concerned because the parking situation in our part of town is already very dire. And I just received a notice from Los Altos that El Camino Real is going to be resurfaced. And there will be bicycle lanes installed. So there will be absolutely no availability for, there's not going to be any on-street El Camino Real parking. And there will be absolutely no availability for hotel guests to queue or park in nearby areas. So all of this parking reduction is of great concern to the surrounding properties. That's all I have to say. And I am concerned about the crush of, we've already got problems and I'm afraid they're going to get worse. I live next door.
Thank you for your comments. Our next speaker.
Then, sorry, could we bring Stephanie back and ask her to state and spell her name for the record?
Sure.
Yes, my name is Stephanie Trams, and I live at 4250 El Camino Real. I've been an owner here for many years.
Could you spell your name for the record?
Yes, first name Stephanie, Stephanie, last name Trams, Tramz.
Thank you so much. Okay,
Thank
let's
you.
go to our next speaker. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Charlene.
And
Good
Charlene,
morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Can I
Okay.
ask you to state and spell your name for the record?
I am Charlene Carlson, Sharlene, Carlson. I am president of Palo Alto Redwoods Homeowners Association, so I'm the neighbor next door. I just wanted to thank Sam and Randy for taking our questions and answering the concerns that our homeowners have always had about traffic and safety issues. At this time, I don't have any additional questions, but thank you.
Thank you, Charlene. Do we have any other members of the public that would like to speak?
We do not have any more raised hands, so that concludes public comments for this item.
All right,
Did,
thank you.
Chair, did Juliana Lee want to speak on this item? She had spoke earlier in the meeting.
That's true, she did. I'd give her the opportunity to speak again if she'd like.
Her hand's not raised, but I can go ahead and unmute her to see if she wants to speak.
I really appreciate the one level, and then I think that truly make me less nervous. Thank you for letting me talk.
Thank you. And could you spell your name for the record?
Juliana, last name is Lee.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any other members of the public that would like to speak?
We currently do not have any other requests for speakers.
All right, thank you. And typically we give the applicant a chance to respond to public comment at this time, if they would like to. Would the applicant like to? Okay, I see a shaked head. We'll move on. Are there any questions of the board, by the board of staff or the applicant?
I have three. I was if I'm the only one, but I don't want to take up everybody's time.
Go ahead, Board Member Balte.
Okay, the one that's most interesting to me, and this is a question to staff, I suppose. As I understand it, the maximum allowed parking reduction is 15% through a TDM. Is that right? That's in code, or is that, what am I missing on that?
No, that's incorrect. It is in the code, and I want to say it's 20%, correct, Sam?
Yes, 20%.
And
Okay,
so,
great.
and if there was a shared use, you could go up to 30%, but they don't have that type of shared use. So it's just 20% maximum.
Okay, so what that would mean is that if they're supposed to supply 96 spaces, the director could approve up to a reduction of 20% from that within
Correct.
the code as it is.
Correct.
So then what I'm grasping at understanding, this is a question to Sam, is that it seems to me you're counting the aisle parking spaces as legitimate spaces and then applying the 15% reduction in your math. Is that right?
We're counting the aisle spaces given that they have the valet to park those spaces. That is correct.
So you're essentially agreeing with the applicant's argument that because they have a valet program, the aisle spaces count as legitimate parking spaces. Because if you did not agree with that interpretation, then it would seem to me that the math would be different. I'm struggling to understand why you would be, or why don't you address for me, please? Why are aisle parking spaces considered normal parking places?
They wouldn't normally be if we did not have the valet, but because we have the TDM program and we have the valet that is part of that program, that's a required part of this project. That's how we're able to count those parking spaces.
But okay, so fair enough. Okay, I understand what you're saying. My second question is again regarding valet parking. In the code, I saw something that said that valet parking is not allowed to have any fees associated with it. And I think I also saw in the applicant's presentation that all parking spaces are going to be charged a $20 fee. Has the city attorney looked into the question of whether that's legitimate? An overall parking fee, including valet fees?
The parking fee does come from the TDM program. In the TDM program, it does detail that that is a way to incentivize the ulterior modes of transportation, in particular for hotel staff.
I'm referencing in the code where they allowed mechanical lift parking. It said there can be no fee associated with using the mechanical lifts. Has the staff or the legal department in the city looked into this? Because this is essentially a fee, as I see it, even though it's associated with all the parking.
So I think it is something we're going to have to look deeper into. But my initial thoughts is that this is a parking adjustment. This is not valet parking that's under code section 10. This is a parking adjustment that's under Title 18. And so there are different regulations that apply. We're really working off of the TDM program and what is contained in there.
Right. Title 10 of the code, I believe, refers to the public parking or use of public right-of-way for the valet, which would be consistent because if you're using the public right-of-way, public property, and then charging private fees for that, that's where the conflict would be. But this is a valet operation wholly on private property.
I guess I'm referring to the section where it allows mechanical lift parking. And there's a clause in there that prohibits charging fees to use those lifts in order to count those as regular parking places. So I'm just pointing that out. I think that's something that needs to be looked at, obviously, but the question really is what the city staff has interpreted that to be. My last question, I guess I can direct to the project architect, is that when I look back at the plans that were approved by the ARB last April, was it? There was a fitness room of some kind out at the facade with a glass wall where the staircase is now coming up from the basement. And we weren't supplied with any floor plans for the main floor or the second floor, perhaps, where this new staircase is. And I'm confused as to what the application is regarding the changes to the facade, if any, adjacent to the porte cochere, where there's a new staircase coming up. So Randy, at the end of your presentation, you showed 2 slides. Maybe you could clarify that for us, please.
I'd be happy to. Yeah, thank you. So yes, Peter, hopefully this is the information you're looking for. We have decided to internally reconfigure the lobby space a bit. Part of that, we added this sculptural stair that will be adjacent to the glass. We thought that would be a more attractive element to have on the glass rather than a bunch of exercise equipment. Right as people enter the hotel, the original design had people working out on treadmills and things literally at the lobby entrance, and so we've altered the interior of the building slightly. Those uses the interior and the mirror of the lobby space, and left something that's a little more.
So can you explain, please, Randy, how this new staircase works? Lead me up from the basement to the lobby level.
Sure. So at the basement, can you see my cursor, Peter?
I can. Thank you. That's very helpful.
Thank you. So at the basement, you would enter the stair here.
Okay.
Exit the stair here. Then you would circle around and enter the stair here and move up to the upper lobby, exiting here.
I see. And that, does the stair continue above that level, or is it just 2 stories?
I'm sorry to say, I don't recall if this continues. I don't believe it does. This particular stair, yeah, I'm sorry. It stops at the lobby.
And you're proposing a glass facade on the side of the stair facing the covered porte cochere as in the original plan? I see that on the elevation here. That's really my concern.
Yeah, so we're going to do, it's not fully designed yet because we're still not submitted to building permit. But the intention here is to have one of these sort of beautiful stairs at the lobby.
And is that staircase an emergency egress from the garage, though? Is it allowed to have a glazed wall?
The stair that comes up from the garage is actually enclosed. that's inside this space. There's an exit.
I'm sorry. So on the floor plan, that one, the straight shot stair is fully enclosed and the other one is not?
There's a wall on this side of it. On this side of it would be open, but you won't see it from below, right? It's below ground level at this level. So again, I don't have all of the detail about this. I don't want to misspeak, and I don't want to lead you in the wrong direction. I'll just admit to not fully knowing all of the details of it yet. But from the ground level, you're inside an enclosure that is fire rated, protected from the garage. Come up this stair and arrive at the lobby level, using the stair here. And so all of that would be below grade with the exception of the guardrail. And this stair is in front of that, essentially really limiting your view through the glass, through the stair and all its elements of this secondary stair.
Okay, thank you for the explanation. I have no other questions, Chair Thompson.
Thank you. Are there any other questions of the applicant? I'm not seeing any. I just had a quick follow-up question on this item.
Come on, Eugene. I do have a question.
Oh, sorry, Board Member Hirsch, I didn't hear you.
I was muted. I'm sorry. I wonder if you could describe, I guess, Randy, I don't know who's best to do this, the valet idea here. Somebody comes to the hotel. They take out their luggage, I gather, under the porte cochere, and the valet then takes the car down to the basement. And also then there are valets in the basement, and families would come and go to the basement first, be directed by signage to go to the basement area and unload. Could you describe a little better how that's really going to work, the valet situation?
I could actually speak to that. The valet operation for vehicles that are going to be parked on site has to take place in the garage level, not at the porte cochere. The porte cochere is really for drop off, like from Uber or Lyft or some other taxi-like service, or for loading area for service vehicles, as it has a double driveway. But if you are going to the hotel with your vehicle and will park, you would be directed to the lower level where you would have the valet booth stationed, and that's where the valet operation is to take place.
Who directs you, Sam?
There's signage that was previously approved, and I believe actually that was refined during the subcommittee hearing. It was one of the items, I think, during the subcommittee also. With the rear massing. The signage does say, valet parking, turn here, go down the ramp. For pickup and drop off is just, and loading is in the porte cochere.
So continuing on that, I note that the area where the drop off is in the basement is really a parking area as well, and that there's a kind of a central areaway that takes you through to the elevator. And I assume that from Randy's description takes you to that staircase as well. But the picture doesn't show it with the two cars in that location. How will that really be seen? Is it really quite a wide open enough space to create access to the elevators, or is it going to be a place where vehicles are moving in and out of storage in that same area where the drop-off is? I don't know who answers that.
There are two accessible spaces that are there because the accessible, actually need a dedicated location per their standard. And there is an accessible path of travel and a walkway adjacent to the parking spaces that does lead to the valet booth. So there's a couple of areas for movement of hotel guests. They're not necessarily walking between a narrow space between two cars.
Okay. I just want to comment about the staircase going, although it isn't clear from the diagrams we're looking at. I recall that there was some usage in that space, that glassed area, that wasn't exactly compatible with entering a hotel, I think, if I remember correctly. And the staircase, if it's easily accessible from the basement, then that's certainly a better entry into the hotel from the valet area in the basement than some other usage that I think was there prior to. So this is in response in a way to what Mr. Bolte was asking. I think that if it can be shown that that is easily accessible, that staircase, it certainly is an improvement in the lobby area above. This might be better off stated later, but I'm stating it now just because it seems to relate to what we're discussing. Thank you.
Thanks. Actually, I have a question for you, Randy. I see that your hand is raised. So maybe we can kind of combine. It's actually about this. So I do see in the previous plans, there was a boardroom on the ground floor and then a fitness room on the upper floor. I also noticed that some of the other stairs have shifted around in the plan, potentially affecting the rear facade and the side facades as well. Can you confirm kind of all the ramifications of the change that's happening here on the ground floor?
Thank you. So I can confirm that the changes that we're making below do not affect the elevations above grade.
Sorry, it's really hard to hear you. Sorry.
Sorry, sorry. Can you hear me all right now?
That's better. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. I can confirm that the changes that we've made below grade do not affect the elevations above grade. The shifts we've made are happening all in the basement, and we've been very careful to maintain the character of the building as approved, so that we don't have conflict at that. I can also just briefly respond to Board Member Hirsch's question, if that's all right, and say that the commission report.
Sorry, your voice keeps coming in and out.
I'm sorry, maybe my microphone's not working right.
Okay, I
can you hear me all right
now.
again? Okay,
Yeah.
Better when you're closer.
Sorry about that. So,
I'm in and out. Couldn't hear.
Is that better?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. It's somehow my microphone shifted. So the technology. So I wanted to just respond to Board Member Hirsch's question as well, if you don't mind. The report that the city commissioned from the city's traffic and transportation engineer really did study the efficiency of that garage and the valet operation. And the conclusion is that there is ample room for queuing and vehicle movements for a valet program in the garage as designed. Sam, if you want to articulate anything further about that, happy to have you jump in about that. But it's my understanding that the design is supported by that memo without any kind of condition. And I think that's it. That's really all I need to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If there are no other questions by the board, I'll close the public hearing and bring it back to the board. Who'd like to go first? Speakers. Board Member Liu. Call on you first.
Sure. I don't really have much to say on this particular item. I will disclose, though, that I have reviewed the number of condominiums sold at Palo Alto Redwoods since the design review for this project started. I have reviewed the TDM program, which was previously proposed, but I did review it again looking at the transit options. And then I will just also add that I have looked at, I have considered people that I've met who have stayed at hotels nearby, mostly the Courtyard Marriott, and also people I've met while I've been on Caltrain who've been trying to get to hotels on El Camino. And that there is something that's a little counterintuitive here on this particular site is that like it's actually easier to get to this site on transit if you actually get off at the University Avenue Caltrain station and take like the express bus. So that's like it's 2 stops away. So it's farther away, but it's actually easier and faster because there's better service. Getting off at the University Avenue station and then taking an express bus down to this site. So so that's all that I have on the TDM. I think for the revised parking list, it seems to me it meets the comprehensive plan goals as stated in the staff report. I can support that, and I don't really see any huge change in the layout that would affect the functioning of the valet service. So I think I can support that. And that's all I have. Thanks.
Thank you, Board Member Liu. Let's go to Board Member Balte.
Thank you, Ozma. Well, I support what Alex said in that I think the valet service is, if anything, improved the way it functions, having it closer to the bottom of the ramp. You don't go around the corner. And I think the sketch the applicant provided convinces me that although there are 2 parking places in front of the entrance into that lower lobby, they're not as likely to be filled. And so it probably will work better than what we already approved. So I have no problem with that layout that way. I am concerned that the changes that are being made to the lobby level are something that are not presented. And I would like to, at a minimum, have those come back to an ad hoc committee to really understand them. My concern being that that glass facade facing the porte cochere is something that was previously approved, and I don't want to see that go away, at least not without the board considering the impact on the design. And I think it might be a little bit of a challenge to get a stair out of the basement with an enclosure and keep that glazed wall. I did toy around with it quickly and thought you could also put the stair back as a straight shot to the back side of the elevator, but that's up to the applicant to propose how they want to do it. But I think that should be something that we see before we sign off on it. It does affect the layout of the building. It might also be worth checking, as Board Member Thompson points out, or Chair Thompson points out, that if there's other changes to staircases throughout the building, we should verify that that's not affecting the external appearance of the building. So I'm modestly concerned about that. Then, in principle, I think the parking count business works fine and the TDM is good. I'm very concerned, though, that we're concerning aisle parking spaces as normal places and then applying the percentage reduction. As I do the math, we are supplying 77 actual parking places, which comes down to about a 20% reduction. And then we're using the TDM to justify the aisle parking places, which is fine, but I think we should be clear that it's a 20% reduction, not a 15% reduction. I really cannot make finding number 1 that it meets the code when aisle parking spaces are clearly not defined as parking places in the code. And the code does not address this question of whether valet parking programs make aisle parking places the legitimate parking spot. And I think that's a very slippery slope to go down. So I absolutely cannot support the tacit assumption here that aisle parking spaces are bona fide parking stalls. Fortunately, the applicants can still do what they want to do and meet it within the required reduction allowed by the TDM, but I strongly feel that the director should consider it to be a 20% reduction. And 5 of those spaces are now legitimate, allowed because of the TDM. I did I guess I should disclose that I went through and read the actual traffic hotel parking study that was made by Hexagon Consultants that was not included, the actual study in our report, and found it very convincing that 13 different hotels in the area are tracking about 0.66 or 66% of parking places per room, which is convincing that this will actually function. I think everything the staff and the consultants and applicants say about the parking functioning with the size of this building is true. I think it will function just fine. Lastly, I would like staff to investigate the fact that mechanical lift parking is not supposed to have a fee associated with its use. That was something the city council made clear when they allowed mechanical lift parking to count as regular parking. Yet I'm sure that the valet service in this hotel, the parking service, is going to have a fee associated with it. And I'd really appreciate it if the city attorney could chime in and make sure that that's a proper interpretation of those conflicting code requirements. So those are my concerns. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Board Member Balte. Board Member Hirsch.
Okay, thank you, Ozma. First, I'd like to just, if he's still around, thank Sam for his very, very complete description of everything that's gone through this project from inception on to the present. It was a very excellent presentation. I sort of agree in some ways with Mr. Balte's comments here, but a slightly different slant on it. There was one question about what happens when the lift isn't working, and I guess you have to assume that transportation has looked at that issue and therefore dismissed it as an issue here. We didn't really get an answer to that particular question, but it appears that Redwoods is happy with the parking arrangement here, and it would certainly affect them the most, but it would also affect El Camino Real. So we have to trust that the city has looked into this, and I guess I will do the same. I agree 100% with the question as to of how this staircase description really affects the facade. As I noted, I thought it was an improvement that the ground level wouldn't be a conference room as noted, but rather be an access from a staircase. But we haven't been given the appropriate description of how all of those changes are really working in the building. I suspect that one answer to the question asked of Randy is that there are some other exits from the hotel. And so all of those could be described rather than leave it up in the air at this point. I'd be okay with it going to committee so that it isn't held up for another ARB, but they need to be addressed in some way, and including the use of the second floor as it affects the facade, and whether or not how the staircases work in that whole area. It seems to me that the parking study, just to question Peter's comments about the 5 spaces that count, seems to me that most parking areas that are valet run seem to work pretty well, and they find the way to accommodate all of the cars and move them around as need be, and as they might be warned that somebody's coming down to pick up a car, and therefore they have to make some adjustments. So in terms of the count, based on the numbers that are being provided and agreed to by the city so far, I can see how that would work. But it's a bit of a surprise because it seems to me that the whole floor is extremely tight. And I wondered why it wasn't possible somehow, even if it was on the same level, to expand that area to accommodate. But it isn't done, and it seems to solve the numbers. So I guess I can say I'd go along with it. The idea again of access to the elevator and the valet treatment down in the basement also seems tight. And you're all saying that you think it will work, and Sam says it was reviewed. But frankly, to me, it's not the best. The way it works with the cars that are actually parked in that same location, and people getting out of cars where you get out of the side of the car and the back of the car is still in that location. You have to come around the extra space that is required for a whole family getting out of a car and luggage getting out of the back of the car, and doesn't seem to me to be very well solved. If this project were to come back to the ARB, I would ask for that to be looked at in more detail. I just think it, in terms of workings of a hotel, you need more space in that area than is given, especially when there are other cars that are also parked in that area, making access to the elevators more difficult. I would like to have seen that shown in a way that you could see it working, with a car parked there, with people getting out of car, with the luggage coming out of the trunk of a car, et cetera, et cetera. It's a normal, busy, very busy area. I almost wonder why it isn't better to have the car with that happening above in the porte cochere, where there's more space. I think there's questions of the tour bus and the issue of that haven't really been properly addressed in transit study. If in fact there are going to be tour buses coming and to this location, if the hotel is intending to service a tour bus kind of access to the site. Actually, I disagree with Alex's comments about, well, somebody can get on a train and get off the train and get on a bus and come to the building. But what about tour buses? How do they come to this hotel? Or do they go somewhere else? Nearby hotel is certainly a better location to deal with tour buses, but this one would have a problem. So are they eliminated? Has that traffic study really been well done? But let's get back to it, folks. This is not something, we are not the ARB and transportation department here. So we have to leave it to the transportation department, but I'm raising the issues and letting everybody else think about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Hirsch. I see that Sam has his hand raised. Are you wishing to speak, Sam?
I think we can wait till the end if you'd like, and we can address everyone's concerns.
Yeah, actually, that would be better.
Okay, let's do that.
wait.
Okay, Vice Chair Lee.
I can be brief. I want to thank everyone who has spoken. I support the director's parking adjustment here. I appreciate the director's direction to talk about this as a public forum. And I understand that city staff has given careful review. We have a compelling traffic report. I too was heartened to see that there were 13 neighboring or in the area hotels, and that 0.66 at the peak. The zoning code is antiquated, and I believe the one per guest room is really too much. So I do not see any issue here. I did also want to mention that the findings 1 and 4 I can support. I believe that the questions that have been raised by my fellow board members, the one that I wanted to bring up was, I heard from the applicant that there are no elevation changes per our previous approval. So I just wanted to confirm if that is the case. I do not believe that we need to hesitate here. It's time to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Lee. Hold on 1 second. I appreciate all of the sentiments from my fellow board members and the members of the public and the applicant and the city's presentation. A lot of my original questions were answered. In general, I can support this adjustment because of all the reasons noted by my fellow board members. And as to the facade change, the changes that I noticed when looking over the approved and the new plan that came to us this week is just the stair locations are a little different, which means they'd probably daylight in a different location on the upper floor. And that was where my concern about the facade change came from. I believe the applicant in that it may not be that significant of a change to the facade potentially, but I would support an ad hoc committee just to look at the ramifications of this change. The stair coming up the 2 stories is really interesting, but it kind of leads me to ask like where those other pieces of program have gone. And in the old plans, we have what looks like rooms that are on the ground floor against the back side, and in the new plan we have a stair daylighting there. So I'm sure things have changed a little bit, and I'm sure it's not that bad. I'm sure it's not very significant. And so if the board felt the need to have an ad hoc committee to look at any of these other subsequent changes to the facade, if there were any significant ones, I could support that as well. Those are my 2 items. In general, I can make the findings 1 and 4 and recommend approval. Go ahead. I'll let the city respond to some of the concerns that they heard.
Yes, so thank you, board members. There's some great questions that we're hearing. Related to any possible exterior changes, staff has not reviewed a building permit yet. Is that correct, Sam?
That's correct.
Okay, and so we will take a look at any drawings through the building permit review. And if we do see significant changes, then we will bring that back to an ad hoc committee. So we'll be able to better judge at that point. Related to board member Balte brought up the, counting aisle spaces as regular spaces. I think it's a good point. We do want to make sure that we're setting the right precedent. And so the director will take another look at that to make sure whether this needs to be a 15% reduction or a 20% reduction, because we do want to set that right precedent. Regarded to fees, I did find the code section that board member Balte was referring to. It does look like it's actually broken into 2 sentences though. And it does say that actually hotels can use lifts. It does say that for other uses, well, let me read it clearly. Mechanical lifts may be used for multifamily, office, hotel, automotive, industrial, or institutional uses, period. Other uses need director approval, and it says cannot have a fee for those users. So I believe those are 2 separate sentences, 2 separate regulations. But again, we'll double check with the attorneys and make sure we're setting the right precedent there as well. As far as the lifts not working, we do have conditions, and I believe the conditions in the previous approval, correct, Sam, about maintenance and
Yes,
having
there
a
has to
system
be a maintenance agreement for the lift systems, and I believe that's a standard condition when we have lifts for projects, commercial projects like this.
Okay. And we hear the concern about, people getting to the stairs and the elevators. We believe we have a sufficient walkway that's been reviewed by transportation. So if there's, we can look at that again, but I think we've done the best we can with this particular floor plan. And the reason that the floor plan was not expanded, at least to the rear, is that we do have some significant redwood trees. And so we're wanting to, maintain our distance from those trees. So those are the clarifications that I had. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jody. Okay, I'll bring it back to the board if there's any other items that board members would like to discuss or a motion.
Can I make a motion, Ozma, please?
Sure.
I move that we recommend to the director that this revision to the project be approved with the following request that revisions to the lobby staircase be brought back to an ad hoc committee, either in the planning process or during the building permit approval process for verification that there's no changes to the exterior facade. I don't want it to go beyond that, but I think that's a fair piece for us. The second part of my motion is that we provide feedback to the director that aisle parking spaces not be considered as normal parking places, and B, that parking fees be verified by the legal department of the city that it's properly done per code.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there anybody that would like to second that motion?
I'll just ask the question as friendly amendments. I think I heard that Jody suggested that staff would be in touch with, would raise the question if there's significant changes to elevations. So I'm just wondering if we need to state in the motion in that way, since the staff will be, maybe we should just say it the way Jody said it, that the staff would.
That's a fine point, Grace. I'm happy to remove the section about strictly to the elevations if you think that matters. I'm just trying to make it, I don't want to get into any other redesign of the building any more than we have to. I'm trying to keep it clean. If that earns your support, I'm happy to do that though.
And then I guess my other thought, and just thinking out loud, I'm just wondering about the other two parts of your motion, if those are appropriate for ARB to be bringing up.
Well, I hear you, Grace, and I agree normally. Frankly, I'm concerned. We approved Castilleja the other day based on staff assuring us that basements in neighborhoods didn't count, and it went to city council and they completely disagreed with that point. And I feel that this is a similar thing. There's a fine line on what the code is actually doing. But to me, an aisle parking place is not a parking place. And I think if the town, if the staff, if the code wants to be changed to make it otherwise, that's fine. But to me, it's a very slippery slope. And I think we owe it to the director to give them a clear statement that aisle parking is not the same as regular parking. Even for valets, you have to move a lot more cars to make that work. All I'm doing is they ask for recommendations to the director, and this is the recommendation I think we should make.
Okay, it sounds like that's something
It's
you feel
nothing
strongly
binding.
for. My feeling is that that's a staff, that we rely on city staff to define what these aisle spaces are. And, clearly this is not something we normally talk about in ARB. I feel like that is something that should be defined by staff before it comes to us. And I'm not sure if it's appropriate to put an ARB motion. So I just wanted to raise that.
That's a fair point. I agree with you normally.
Yeah, I might, just to continue the discussion on this, I'm trying to think if I've read any code that says one way or the other whether aisles count as parking spaces. I don't know if city staff can advise if that is currently in the code.
I thought the applicant showed us the section of the code where it said it did not at the beginning of the presentation.
So the applicant's showing you chapter 10, which is not necessarily in play here because it is a private valet lift system. Again, I don't have a full answer for you today, but that's why we're going to go back and take a look at it and make sure we are setting the right precedent. But as Board Member Balte said, even if we don't count those aisle spaces, we would just have to increase the director's adjustment to 20%. And the project would still be able to move forward in the same fashion.
Actually, if I could amend my motion to include on advice to the director that the board supports supports a 20% TDM reduction in parking to make this feasible.
The board member Valte, if I could restate your motion.
Please.
So you are moving to recommend approval with a sort of recommendation or a additional note to the director of planning that should aisle parking be considered in the parking count, that we could recommend approval of a 20% reduction. And then you had said you wanted, or you agreed to strike the item about the exterior facade with the assumption or with the knowledge that staff will bring it back if there are changes. All right.
Well, no, I want the new floor plan for the staircase in the lobby to come back to the ad hoc committee. And we can leave it at that. There's no additional stipulation what the committee is looking at. In response to Grace's concern about just being the elevation.
Okay. And then you had a third item about the parking fees.
Well, yes, I was just concerned that what seems to me a conflicting element in our code be addressed by staff before this is approved. But I can strike that if it sort of takes to earn a second. So far, I'm not having much luck. So,
would anybody like to discuss? And is there a second? I'm not hearing a second.
I'll just ask the question. It sounded like staff is going to be finding the answer to that question regarding the parking fee, whether it shows up in a motion or not. Is that, I just don't know if that needs to be placed in the motion, in that staff is hearing our comments and going to be moving forward with that research.
So can I get your second, Grace, if we strike that one?
And maybe you could just repeat what the motion is.
Okay, so I move that we recommend to the director that the project be approved as submitted with the request that the final staircase floor plan be brought back to an ad hoc committee of the Architectural Review Board. Secondly, that the board recommends that the director approve the revised parking count with up to 20% TDM reduction, and that the Architectural Review Board recommends that aisle parking spaces not be considered as normal parking spaces in the parking calculations.
I'll just say that I'm not one that needs to see anything back, even at the ad hoc, and I'm not sure about adding the aisle. So I think I'll just I don't think I'll second.
I see that board member Hirsch is trying to say something, but you're on mute, board member Hirsch. You're still muted. We still cannot hear you. So,
and if I may, I think maybe the board members are struggling because this is a little outside of the purview. I think it might be worthy of making a motion on the proposed project, and then afterwards providing comments to staff that we would, I mean, we're always willing to listen to the ARB, and we could take those more as comments versus a motion. And we're very willing to look into the things that board member Valte has asked for.
Thank you. I see that board member Hirsch was able to unmute himself.
Yes.
We can hear you now.
I think we could leave most of this to the staff and eliminate the requirement for a response at this time regarding the valet spaces, the 5 extra spaces. I don't see why it's critical to an approval at this time. So I would ask Peter to re-describe the motion without that, if that's possible.
No, I'll leave it to somebody else to make a motion then, if that's okay. I mean, it's fine. The motion fails for lack of a second. Ozma, go on.
Yes. Okay, would anybody else like to make a motion?
Well, I thought Grace could put hers together. Well, if not, okay, go ahead, Grace.
I feel like I'm always speaking up too much. Alex, feel free to chime in if you
Okay,
wanna.
I'll make a motion. I move that we approve the project for the staff's recommendations with the stair coming back to ad hoc committee.
A second.
Okay, motion by Thompson, seconded by Hirsch. Would anybody like to discuss this further? Nope.
Can you simply repeat it again? I'm sorry.
I just moved that we approve the project and then have the stair and any other exterior facade changes come back to ad hoc committee. Okay, can we get a vote?
Yes. Board Member Bolte?
No,
Sorry,
I'm
we
sorry.
can't hear you.
I'm opposed. No.
Okay. Board Member Hirsch?
Yes.
Vice Chair Lee?
Yes.
Board Member Liu?
Yes.
Chair Thompson?
Yes.
Okay, the motion carries 4-1.
Okay, thank you. I see that you have your hand raised. Randy, do you have a quick comment?
Yes, thank you so much for your discussion. I'm not trying to derail the process at all here, but we have literally been waiting months and months to get to this hearing, and our ability to have our project reviewed and approved is being held up by this discussion. And while we very much appreciate the detail, I'd like to be able to get back to ad hoc committee or have the process move forward with plan check review with staff concurrent with that process. So if we can come back to ad hoc at the very next meeting on the 20th, we are available to do that. Thank you.
So just to be clear, staff has not allowed the applicant to submit a building permit just yet because this garage is very foundational to that structure. And we wanted to make sure, that the 1-story versus the 2-story was going to be approved. So now that it's approved, now we can let the applicant submit their building permits. As part of those building permits, we'll see what the changes are to the stairways. And we will bring that to the ad hoc committee before we approve the building permit, but the building permit can be submitted at this time.
Okay, thank you. I think this item can be closed.
Thank you. Chair, if I may, can I just get a 5-minute recess before the next item?
Certainly. Yeah, let's meet back here at 10, let's say 10:10. Alrighty, I think we are all back now. So we'll move on to our next item, which is a study session. This is a review of the City of Palo Alto's boards, commissions, and committees handbook and discuss implementation of its contents. So Jody, I understand you have a little presentation.
I do, just 1 second. Okay, and then I need to, is that showing full screen?
Not yet.
There we go. Okay.
Now it is.
Yay. All right. So Jody Gerhardt, Manager of Current Planning. Just wanted to give a short presentation on the handbook. This is on November 30th, 2020, the Council Ad Hoc Committee presented the handbook to the full council. And at that time, council made a motion that they adopted the handbook. They also made some other clarifications, and these are just the ones that affect the ARB. So they're going to be using the ARB application. They modified the terms for the ARB and the HRB to be 3 terms. The term limits would apply to current board members. They are requiring staff reports be provided 7 days in advance of the hearing. And also the clerk's office does need to make some ordinance changes, and the term limits are one of those things that does need to be changed in the ordinance. So that's not effective quite yet, but by the time it matters, it will be effective. And so if it'll go to, there we go, next slide. So staff and board members did attend a training in March of this year. And as I said, the clerk's office will be bringing forward the necessary ordinance changes to a June 1st hearing. In the handbook, it does list out the goals and purpose for the ARB, you know, as directed by City Council. So their goals and purposes are to promote orderly and harmonious development, enhance the desirability of residences or other investments, encourage the attainment of the most desirable use of land and improvements, enhance desirability of living conditions upon the immediate site or in adjacent areas, promote visual environments which are of high aesthetic quality and variety, and which at the same time are considerate of each other, and to implement and enforce city ordinances pertaining to architecture and design. So the board is also composed of 5 members, 3 of whom are required to be architects, landscape architects, building designers, or other design professionals. Terms are for 3 years, and they will start on November 1st. Whereas in the past, they have started on December 16th, and residency is not required. So a large portion of the handbook is dedicated to board members' personal code of conduct. So we do ask that you review that, and there is a form that needs to be filled out and returned to staff. I believe some of you have already done that. There's also roles for the chair. At the beginning of the year, the board would select a member to be chair, whereas currently in our bylaws it says October. The chair exists to structure productive meetings, encourage the input of ideas, promote inclusiveness, and facilitate the overall decision-making process. However, they do not have any greater power than any other member. The chair would also ensure that the ARB completes an annual work plan in June and reports the results annually to the City Council. Now, given we're so close to this June, I will need to confirm with the city clerk how it's going to be handled this first year. The handbook also discusses subcommittees and ad hoc committees. We had previously referred to our committee as a subcommittee, but in reading the handbook, we now will be calling it an ad hoc committee, as that our committees are, you know, short-term, established for a specific project usually. So they convene for a single topic and they disband once that work is done, as will be done later today. The ad hoc committee does not need to be noticed or open to the public. However, normally we're in chambers where the public could see what's going on, and the chair makes the assignments to the ad hoc committee. So effective today, staff will be ensuring that future minutes are in summary form. That's one of the other items that's in the handbook, so that we no longer need to do the verbatim minutes, which I think will be helpful for everyone, that they will be in a more condensed fashion, but still get everyone's point across. We will also be gathering those signed statements from board members saying that you have read through the entire handbook. We will also return to the ARB in the near future with the necessary changes to the bylaws, mostly the chair election, that would be at the beginning of the year. And we would be using the ad hoc committee title going forward. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thanks. Are there any questions or comments from the board on this item?
I had a couple of questions. And
Go ahead.
I'd love to hear what other board members think, or Jody, you can just simply answer. So I saw in the, I did go to that orientation or, a meeting recently online. And I see in the handbook that, when we talk about the terms, I just want to make sure, does that mean, because on page 8, packet page 144 today, I see that, I just was wondering about this consecutive terms or successive as it applies to ARB, because I understand the term limit as it's shown in your slide. So that was one question. And then the other question is, I saw you mentioned November 1st. And then I just recall that, Chair Osma and myself, we came on not November 1st this year. So does that mean our year, our term is 3 years, but it would be November 1st, right?
Yes, so as far as term limits, that was what you see written here was amended by the council motion. So for the ARB and the HRB, that they would be allowed to serve 3 terms of 3 years, which equals 9 years total. That is a ordinance change that needs to be made by the city clerk, and that will happen in the near future, before we need to reappoint anyone.
Some cities have this, not successive terms, or I don't know if there's any language in that, just so we understand, because not over 9 years, how does it work in terms of, could it be you serve once and then you come off and you come back again? I'm just thinking about some of our board members who've been on for a while.
Yeah, this is it currently says 2 successive terms. My understanding is that they would change that to 3 successive terms for ARB and HRB members.
Oh, I see.
So that it could be a solid 9 years.
Okay, and then I just thought to ask, because we do have it and it's not required, but normally we do an ARB retreat. And if that's something that's going to be on our calendar, and then this June work plan, just maybe you can tell us, or Chair, you can tell us what the plan is for the work plan.
Yeah, so I think the retreats have kind of been as requested, as needed, but that's something that could be put into the work plan.
Yeah, I think we were discussing doing a retreat, but I think the logistics are still up in the air. I think we should discuss it, given that all of our meetings are still virtual. Maybe it's something we can agendize for next time to discuss our retreat and how we want to do it.
We can certainly add that to the agenda.
Osma, can I point something out that I wonder about?
Yeah, sure.
In the past, we've made an annual report to City Council, and that's because it was required for us to do so in the bylaws to both City Council and the Planning Commission. Is it the intention that this work plan will now replace the annual report? That would seem to make sense to me, but I'm just trying to be clear.
It would seem to make sense. I don't think, I think that's a discussion that the board members could have, because the council is asking for the annual report in sort of the summer time period versus at the end of the calendar year.
I think it would be a good idea for us to remove from the bylaws the annual report requirement and instead bring in the work plan requirement at the council's requested schedule. I don't think other boards and commissions have an annual report requirement. And certainly it's been something that's been spotty with the ARB over the years.
The packet page that I'm looking at kind of speaks to those things in the same breath, it says work plan / annual report, almost as if they're the same thing.
I think it is a look forward and a look backwards, yes.
Yeah, the council has asked the annual report to include some metrics of how your past annual reports have gone, which is effectively a look backwards. I'm just suggesting that when we make the bylaw changes, we should get rid of the annual report then, so it's not lingering.
Just because I guess you're seeing it as a separate additional thing than the annual report that they're asking us for.
Well, I know I started pushing for us to do the annual report a few years ago, back when Win Firth was the chair, because a couple of members of the Planning Commission had come to us and said, look, this is required in the law, you have to do this. And it's true, that's what it says. And so we did, and it takes a bit of work to do that. I don't think we should do that and a work plan. That's a lot of work, and they're redundant.
What do other folks think?
I agree.
I agree too.
Makes sense.
Board Member Liu?
Yeah, I think that's fine. I don't have any issues with that annual report and meeting. I think in the past it was considered the annual report or joint city council meeting, and a lot of times a meeting would be scheduled and then it would get bumped, several times and then not happen, and so that was the reason why sometimes the annual report didn't get written. And so it seems to me that the process going forward seems to be clearer.
I'm actually a little confused about it. So I see the work plan as what we plan to do throughout the year, like the look forward, and then in the text that I'm reading here, it doesn't say anything about summarizing what's happened to date, which would be what was the annual report. And so is the board suggesting that we don't summarize our comments from the last year at all?
Wouldn't an annual report be just a listing of projects that were reviewed and the date of approval and the general opinions or whatever, some summary of the opinions, just like we're doing summary of the meetings? You could do a summary of the opinions. And after each, I wouldn't say it was necessarily our responsibility to do this either.
Yeah, and I think our last annual report was, it wasn't quite that explicit. I think it was more just kind of our thoughts and understandings, things that we had noticed in the past year when we've been reviewing stuff that might be helpful for City Council to know. So am I hearing from the majority of the board that we don't want to do that anymore and we just want to do a future looking forward work plan?
Also, if I can interrupt, I'm reading the handbook now on page 20 of the handbook, or at least as it's written now, it says the annual report should include the results of the prior year's plan. In our case, that probably is the same thing as our annual report. Actually, it calls it here the annual work plan and performance measures.
Oh, okay. I was looking at a different part of the, I was looking at a different thing.
I see that, Peter. I just wanted to let you know also on packet page 169 or the exhibit A, page 33. It just seems like that, what you just read, which is kind of summarized what an annual report is not in the work plan guidelines and process. So I feel like it's just a missing bullet point that is not included in exhibit A. So that's why it's confusing.
I think that's a good point, Grace. Maybe we could ask staff to see if that can be included in Exhibit A, if it's intended.
Yeah,
for
because
that
it
to
does
be
seem
included.
funny, right? Because it's in the paragraph description, then it says see Exhibit A, but when you go to Exhibit A and the bullet points, there is no reference to
Yes,
back.
you're absolutely correct, Grace, about that.
So I guess I'm reading packet page 169, sort of at the very end there. It does say to give a list of priorities, projects, and goals, but it also says status updates. And that if items are not complete, include why and those sorts of details. So, and I think too, this on packet page 170, you see a work plan template, but that is really just a template. The board can choose to do this in a slightly different manner if they choose.
Okay, so status updates, Jody, might refer back to what has happened this past year in your mind?
That's how I was reading it. I agree it's not 100% clear, but and I can go verify with the clerk's office, but I think if the board wants to look forward and backwards, that would seem appropriate.
Okay, I see. So it should include both the forward and the backwards. It's not explicitly written. Okay, well, that makes sense to me now. And then like you were saying, Jody, they're asking us to have this by June. Our next meeting is canceled. So the next time that we're all going to meet is June. And so I think, we just discussed agendizing this for that meeting in June. But it seems like we were agendizing it to discuss it for when we actually discuss it probably later in that month. Does that sound about right to everybody?
Are you looking for additional comments on any of this wording at this time?
Yeah.
Just on the board's goals and purposes are to, and then the final one is to implement and enforce. Is this what we do, or do we recommend conformance with city's ordinances pertaining to the architecture and design? Are we the agency that implements and enforces this?
What page are you on?
I'm sorry?
Sorry, what page did you read that on?
Page 133.
Packet page 145.
Package page 135.
45 has the purpose.
I was looking on page 133, which were goals and purposes of the ARB, page 9. Packet page to implement and enforce the city's ordinances.
Yes, 133 and 145 are the same thing.
Oh, okay.
Jody, can you steer us to where, 145 is the actual architecture review board language.
Correct. That's straight from
Same
the
thing.
council.
Yeah, it's the same thing. Okay, exactly.
Yes, David is correct that the word enforce is not consistent with the role of the ARB, I don't believe. Our authority essentially extends to a recommendation.
While I'm at it, if I could bring up just a few other issues here. I note that I just went back to look at the findings, and so if I might just digress the study here a little bit, if we took this to back at page 30.
Wait, hold on. Before you go there, Board Member Hirsch, I'd like to discuss enforce a little bit, or just get other board members' comments, because I just Googled the definition of enforce, and it does say compel observance or compliance with a law or rule or obligation, and that's what we're doing here. So I have no problem with the word enforce.
Well, I think it's better to say recommend conformance with the city's ordinances.
Is there any comments from Board Member Liu? or Vice Chair Lee?
Yeah. Uzma, in the past, the city attorney's office has said that we were not, our purview did not extend to code enforcement. Say, like we used to have a code enforcement department. So like we were not supposed to involve ourselves with, say, like illegal signs, you know, that were not ARB projects. So I think that the way it's written is a little too broad. So I think that maybe that we should point that out. I think we should just highlight that to staff. So there is a role of enforcing existing codes, but then there's other issues beyond that, you know, beyond the ARB's purview as well.
I'll just say that I agree. And if you turn the page to 146, it's interesting how the HRB, the language is very different in terms of review and make recommendations, research and make recommendations. So I do think the word enforces, the connotation is, we aren't compliance officers. And so I just, yeah, maybe it should be reviewed by staff.
Okay, that's fair.
I have then under, this is far afield, but take it as you will. I look back at findings number 3, and it says design of highly aesthetic quality using high quality integrated materials and appropriate construction techniques and incorporating textures, colors, and other details that are compatible. And I personally would like to add with each other and enhance the surrounding area. You know, compatible with and enhance the surrounding area doesn't mention how they relate to each other. So it's a small addition, which, is it possible to pass findings that are different? Does that have to go through legal procedures here in Palo Alto? I don't know, but I find the wording isn't appropriate.
Talking about, so it's not on the agenda.
It isn't on the agenda, you're right.
We should be discussing this.
Shall we leave it alone?
Yeah, we're just talking about the handbook right now.
Okay, the handbook, all right. So I do have some other comments here, and that is council liaison. There is no council liaison for the ARB, is there? I don't know of one. I think it would be nice to have one. I note that in particular, it would be good when information that is decided upon by the council is noted to us. For example, there was a project, I think, that they disapproved on Bayshore, the one that we actually discussed in the recent meeting, because it was in a flood zone. And mentioning this to Peter the other day, he was unaware of it because it was a news item that if you read the newspaper, you would have heard that. But items like that don't get back to us, that we ought to be able to know about, I think, are important. How to make that information available to us would be normally through some kind of liaison with the council, but we don't have that relationship. I think it should be done. We should have that. You know, under work plan, I think we've already been discussing that, but yeah, I think we've discussed that in plenty of detail so far. So one other general comment I have, and that is that the board would be would include a landscape person. I personally have wished that were possible, not leaving it all on Alex's back all the time. He does a great job, but landscaping is a certainly a specialty in itself, which we as architects would normally turn to some consultant, and the city and the projects that are presented to us normally have a landscape architect, the better ones anyhow. And it would be beneficial for us to have a landscape architect as a member of our committee as well. So how to achieve that? I think it's an important thing to try to achieve, but how is it possible to include that in our committee?
Thank you, Board Member Hirsch. Are there any other thoughts from other board members, either on items that Board Member Hirsch brought up or other items?
Just some background information, maybe, David. The city council went through maybe 4 or 5 years ago a real overhaul of the findings we have to make. It was quite a process. It was really a thing that took several council meetings to close on, and so even a change of one word there would be a big deal.
Okay.
The same thing applies, I think, to other aspects of how we work. Things like putting a landscape architect on the board. It doesn't seem like it perhaps, but they've given a lot of thought politically to what's the right way to make it up. And that's where they've landed on this. So the board's, this handbook, I think, is more just sort of a guideline to how to operate than it is any change to ordinances that establish our boards. The second thing I can point out is I think the council's fairly conflicted on whether they want liaisons to the Architectural Review Board and the Planning Commission. And that's why they don't explicitly say here that they're going to have it. I don't think they had a consensus when they were discussing even this booklet. I think the board has been very clear that we would like to have a liaison to city council for exactly the reasons you mentioned. And I think it would be great if staff could help us bring that message to them. I think we've consistently and repeatedly asked them for more communication between the council and what they're doing and our operations. But I don't know that they've, I think they did not put it in this booklet because that was as much as they could get approved. So that's just background. And Alex is right that some of these are just not even on the agenda today. So I just offer that for thought.
Yes, so today is just a study session, just a discussion, no motion needed. But I am obviously taking notes. Thank you, Board Member Balte, for the discussion about findings, because it is a long process. But obviously, if something's desired, we'll go through that process. As far as the council liaison, we will bring that message forward. I think another option is that planning management can do a summary that I can read out for things that would affect the ARB or be relevant. So we can certainly try and do a little bit more on that. And then as far as the landscape architect on the board, the 3 of the members do have to be, either an architect, a landscape architect, or a design professional. So that actually is a requirement. I would assume that maybe we just haven't had as many landscape architects apply. So it might be a matter of talking to your friends. So thank you.
Thank you. Any further thoughts?
Postma, I had one question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I guess this is for staff, maybe, is like social media posts by board members. So, I was watching the housing element working group selection, by the council, and they were reviewing social media posts by the applicants. And it seems to me like years ago, so I'm saying over 10 years ago, the city attorney really tried to discourage board members from posting just because there was a real gray area with regard to bias and ethics and stuff, and it was just I think, at least from his mind at the time, that it was just safer not to for board members not to post. So, you know, a lot has happened in that time, and I don't really see very much in here about that. And so I guess if there's another edit of the booklet, that I would appreciate guidance on that. And I think, you know, when we go through our ethics training, I think that, you know, the city attorney still says it's kind of a gray area, and to be careful about posting and what gets posted. But at the same time, and just on this last council hearing, it seemed like they were expecting at least the housing element working group to be socially media active and to be, you know, promoting things through their own social media. And so that seems to be a departure from past guidance.
Interesting. Yeah, thank you for that feedback. Any other comments, Vice Chair Lee?
I don't have any real comments. I did think to just touch upon, you know, I think we've talked previously about the liaison, and I understand the kind of, the council has never achieved it. So in a way that represents all boards, commissions, and committees with a liaison. And I just asked the question, if ARB asked for one, or PTC, maybe all the boards, commissions, and committees deserve to have that liaison, and there isn't capacity given the ask. And then the comment about landscape architects, I appreciate that. I do feel like landscape is a big part of our purview. I also just want to point out that, you know, the current language does include landscape architects, as Jody mentioned. At the time that many of our terms are completed, sometimes there are very few people who want to step up to service to the city. And I do think it's something that we as board members should be aware of, that, you know, this is an important position. And during that time of term limits, it's important to kind of check in with current board members, see if they're going to be reapplying, but also welcome new members, and just ensure that the board continues quality kind of review and service to the city. So I think that's important.
Yeah.
Chair, if I may, I did want to note on the council liaison that council thinks that ARB projects that get appealed do go before the council. And so there may be some conflict there, which is likely why we don't have a liaison right now, but I will go double check all of that.
Osma, can I come back to something Alex was just talking about?
Sure.
He was talking about social media posts and just in general interacting with the media. And I'm reading again more clearly the packet page 163, where they talk about interaction with the media and the public. And I think Alex's words should be taken fairly seriously, because we behave as a quasi-judicial body quite a lot. And I would think that the standards they're putting here would be inappropriate when we're evaluating some of our projects. Certainly, I think we would want to have another bullet point. Even when you're acting in a quasi-judicial manner, there's a much higher standard I believe we have to follow. You know, between reviews of a project, we really shouldn't be expressing opinions online, even if we clearly state that they're our own. And I don't think any of us do that, but reading this, it would seem that that would be okay. And I don't think it is.
That's a good point. What do others think about that?
I have a comment to make on it. Maybe it would be best if we ever did something like that, to say this is not an opinion of the as a member of the ARB.
You should always be making clear when you're speaking for the ARB versus when you're speaking for yourself. But as Board Member Balte said, if it's a pending project, then you need to make sure that you're not making a decision on a project outside of a public hearing.
Yes.
It seems like it would be a worthy clarification on that packet page.
We will certainly bring that to the clerk's attention. And as I said, the council will look at this again on June 1st. And so I will get those suggestions to them as quickly as possible.
Sounds good. Any other final thoughts? Okay. And I guess we'll close the study session. Thanks for everyone's feedback. I thought it was cute that they mentioned PDAs on there. You gotta turn off your PDAs. Okay, so that is it for our study session. Our next item is the approval of the minutes for April 1st, 2021. Can I get a motion? Or are there any comments, edits?
I will move that we approve the minutes.
Second.
Motion by Lou, seconded by Balte. Can you get a vote? Vin? Hey, Vin.
Sorry, I'll do the roll call here.
Okay.
Chair Thompson,
Yes.
Vice Chair Lee,
Yes.
Board Member Liu,
Yes.
Board Member Hirsch,
Yes.
and Board Member Balte.
Yes.
Okay, that was unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, our next item is board member questions, comments, or announcements. The first item is the North VCAP working group updates.
Yeah, there are no updates. It's going to the council in June for discussion.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or announcements? Okay.
Yes,
Great.
I have one. This is going back. I'm sorry to go back in the item, but packet page 117. I would like the name of Su Hong Restaurant to be removed from the restaurant, cafes, delis, coffees, and bakeries within the neighborhood of the new hotel. That's packet page 117.
You're asking for a change to the minutes.
Just a joke. Okay, sorry.
Well, I'll second your joke, David. Good.
Sorry, I missed that. Okay. Sounds like it was just a joke, though.
Well, think about it, Osman.
I don't get it.
Oh, okay. Asma, that's the site.
Oh,
The hotel.
Site. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, all right. Well, all right. If there's nothing else, then we'll adjourn.
Thank you, Osman.
Yes, and we'll
Asma.
just, Board Member Balte and is it Board Member Liu? Yes, Balte and Liu will stay on for the subcommittee, and Claire Raybold is the project planner. So she will take over from here, and I will say goodbye to everyone.
All right.